Best of r/malicious compliance episode 83. Subscribe for Reddit videos daily. My father worked as a police officer starting in early 1950s in a mid-sized city. He walked a beat in the north part of the city. Yeah, it was before police cars and radios. When he got to a payphone, he used his dime to call the operator. She refunded his dime and connected him to the station to report all was well. As the years went on, he decided to try for promotion. I remember him studying many thick tomes for long periods. He finally got promoted to sergeant and he transferred into homicide investigation. As a homicide investigator, he was often called upon to interview people currently held within the city jail. The city jail was headed by a captain at the top. It was jail policy that the investigators wait until it was convenient for the jail staff to provide the inmates requested for an interview. This meant long wait times usually. Inmates get fed, go to the nurse's office, or to court, talk to their lawyers, moved into other cells, etc. Then it happened. A man wearing 2 prosthetic arms killed another man by striking him in the head with one of the arm hooks. According to Dad, the man wore a type of harness and elastic which caused the hooks to function. My dad took the arms and placed them inside the evidence room as murder weapons. Then he dropped the suspect off at the city jail. It took about a week and my father was summoned to the district attorney office in City Hall. When he entered the office, there sat the captain of the jail. Needless to say, the jail captain was livid. The DA asked my dad if he placed an armless man in the city jail. My dad told him yes. The DA asked where his arms were. My dad explained they were possible murder weapons and had been placed in the evidence locker for testing and safekeeping. The jail captain interrupted and stated the arms had to be returned immediately because his staff was having to feed the inmate and wipe his ass when he used the bathroom. He accused my father of deliberately taking action to cause issues due to the jail policy of assigning homicide investigators long wait periods to interview folks held in the jail. This was the first inkling the DA had of what was happening in the jail. He told the captain the homicide investigators were acting in his name, carrying out their duties, and were to be an override to any jail priority short of full-scale rioting. And if that was an issue, he would gladly walk down the hallway with the captain to the chief's office to discuss it further. The captain looked sullen but agreed reluctantly. Then the DA asked my dad if it would be possible to give the inmate at least one arm so he could function while in jail. My dad said it could be done if he wished it. And that was how the new jail policy came about. Thank you. Next. Picture it. Tech support. 20XX. I had a job doing tech support for a small company that did software as a service for a niche. I'd been hired at the company as tier 1 support with the understanding that they wanted to create a tier 2 position to do more advanced stuff, and that job was mine once I got the hang of things. Quick aside. Get promises like that in writing when you get hired, kids. I'd been at the place for about a year with no promotion. In that time I'd learned their systems and worked with the web development, database, and product development people so that I could start doing a lot of the tech support stuff that used to fall on their shoulders within our department. Eventually, after discussions with the head of product development and the head of my department, it was decided I'd start doing the more advanced stuff as my main job, and that I'd be the one in tech support to politely tell clients to pound sand if they were asking for something that was impossible, or trying to finagle a freebie via tech support when they didn't get it in sales. This meant I took a hit in surveys because clients didn't like to hear no, even if it was put in flowery language. But my boss knew the score and told me it wasn't a problem. Cut to the call. A client calls in saying that a critical piece of client data has been deleted from their system. It just so happens that our software gave us the ability to see who did what in the software. So I did a quick check and discovered that the person who called me had been deleting records that day, something we advised them not to do, and ended up deleting a chunk of information that they needed. They then called and blamed it on the software. I gave them the usual spiel about a fee for restoring information. They went ballistic saying they shouldn't have to pay a fee when our software was at fault. I pointed out the record we had that showed they'd done it, and that we recommend against deleting records to avoid just this scenario, and they hung up in a tizzy. I figured I might get a question from my boss about it, but everything I'd done was by the book and boss hadn't had a problem with that before. Then I got called into the meeting. The company owner liked to have a personal relationship with all his clients. He got to shoot the breeze with them and be the good guy. which meant clients had his personal cell phone number and they could call and get him to override anything his employees said. The practical upshot was a lot of time was wasted catering to last-minute changes, freebies, or trying to do the impossible because he wanted to be a people pleaser. Well, I get called into a meeting with the owner, the product development people, the database people, and my boss. I get chewed out for ignoring a critical issue where the software is deleting records. I can't get in a word edgewise because he's reaming me for not caring about the customers and being rude. It's pretty clear he got one side of the story from the client calling him, and he's not interested in hearing my version. He then tells the product development and database people that they need to put everyone on this problem immediately, that this is a terrible bug that could cause big issues. He then looks at me and tells me that I'm not to interfere with the investigation in any way, because he wants people who are good with the clients on this one. He cited my lower satisfaction numbers, and from my boss's silence they seemed more than happy to throw me under the bus. I could have told them the only bug in the system was PEBKAC, but I figured if he was going to be a dick and my boss wasn't going to step in, then I was going to do exactly what he said. So people were pulled off of their work to find this bug. What resulted was a couple of weeks of the owner breathing fire at people to track it down. This resulted in a bunch of money being wasted both in labor hours trying to track down a non-existent bug, and all the money wasted because they weren't working on updates to the software or things for new clients. Occasionally someone would stop by my desk and ask if I had any insight. I think the shit-eating grin I had when they were discussing the bug was a tip-off I knew something, but I politely told them I was following the owner's orders and not interfering since I wasn't good with clients. At the end of those couple of weeks another meeting was called with the owner. The various teams said they were unable to find anything. At this point I raised my hand and told them I might have something. The owner looked pissed, but I pulled out the log I'd found that clearly showed the user going in and deleting the information, which was something that wasn't there when they went to look because the user can turn off logging and delete records on their end, and the shitweasel I talked to on the phone had done just that when they realized they were at fault. They didn't delete the record I'd saved, though. The owner got angry all over again and asked why I hadn't said anything. The real answer was I was over the job at that point and had a side gig that was very quickly going to become my main gig, which resulted in a lot of fun little moments of malicious compliance. But in this case I simply smiled and said I was following his orders not to talk with the client or the people investigating this terrible bug. Thank you. Next. This happened some years ago. I was reminded of it by reading stories on here. I just moved to Sydney and had been living in a share house for a few months. That I found though a flat share website. We got on okay, would go out to parties together, etc. Most of the stuff in the house was theirs. I only brought my fridge, and they had just thrown theirs out, considering it replaced. I'm about to get the week's groceries and ask my housemate if she wants anything. No, she's good. I get lots of food to cook for the week and come home to find her standing awkwardly with her boyfriend. She had weird news. They had decided to move out together. How exciting. Okay, so I guess that means I take over the lease? Nope. They considered themselves the last in a long line of friends who'd leased the house, and being the last to go, thought it fitting to terminate the lease. They had notified the landlord prior to speaking to any of us. They figured I could stay with my sister. Jack was only in the country another month, and Sarah was hardly here anyway. Okay, so I didn't have a leg to stand on. Legally, I wasn't signed on the lease, so I had 3 weeks to vacate. House hunting is like a part-time job, and I already had a full-time job. No time to cook all that food, I guess. It had been good to know before the shop. I got lucky and found a house just down the road on the same day. Nice people, good spot, and close enough that I could move my things in by hand, immediately if I like. I slept in my new house that night. But I always like to think you haven't really moved in until your fridge is in, and don't worry, I had that sorted too. The others in the house found new places quickly too, leaving the happy couple home alone. I came back to pick up a couple of loose ends 3 weeks later and got to see their fridge work around in all its slumly glory, an esky full of food floating in melted ice. The revenge was petty and small, proportionate to their actions. Thank you. Next. So this is a story of my mom's workplace. She is a therapist for seniors without medical duties, so essentially a babysitter for old people. Many of them have Alzheimer or other sorts of dementia. They play games. She reads them books and helps them with eating. This being said, she is almost 60 herself now and some of the people she takes care of are barely 5 years older than her. She got into a new job at a retirement home 3 years ago and 6 months ago it got sold to a new company and all the higher management positions got replaced by people from said company. Slowly discontent started to grow between the lower supervisors because rules and standing orders have been changed in ridiculous ways. A few examples. The therapists had drawn and painted a lot of pictures with the residents and some of them were really beautiful. All had to be removed and after asking for a reason they said people could get hurt by the pieces of paper on the walls. Next day everything was gone, thrown away by the new facility management company. The therapists had their constant station, floors they work on, so they always had the same residents to take care of, which helps when some of the really lonely residents had a person they knew. The new management put a new rotation into effect, that all therapists go up a floor each week, 5 floors. So that they would see their regular residents every 5 weeks. As it happens, sometimes the person you took care 5 weeks ago was dead when you'd return. She was super unhappy with the new conditions as were others. Quite a few of her colleagues quit the job and new applicants were rare, so they had to take care of more residents, shortening the time they can watch after 1 resident per day. Ultimately she decided to quit too. Sure it's shit for the residents but this work environment made her actually sick. One day on her last week, one of the executives of the new management was there and she happened to be working on the same floor that week. She was called into the meeting to buy food for the conference and the executive gave her a very detailed list what to buy. It was relatively expensive out of Java. She objected saying she still has 20 residents to take care of and that her contract didn't include shopping. The boss interrupted her saying, "You work for me, so do your job and do what I say." As she left the room to comply, he also said to her to bring him a bottle of whiskey. She got his private credit card for that. She left and went shopping. She bought exactly what was on the list and finally she took a super shitty scotch and put it on the same transaction, therefore making it impossible for the entire transaction to get a tax refund or to declare it as company expenses, as it is not allowed here to declare alcohol as company expenses during business hours. So one time, food on the boss and probably the crappiest whiskey to ever touch his lips. Edit fixed some typos. Thank you. Next. On mobile. So for 6th grade, my mother decided to send me to a private Christian school. Not sure why. We weren't religious, but I think she was scared of the rumors of the local middle school I would have went to instead. This was a tiny school. The graduating class had 7 people in it. Everyone had been together since kindergarten. And I was the only new girl in the entire school. It was great. The only good thing was the teacher that everyone loved. However, she left halfway through the year for maternity leave, and was replaced with the worst substitute I have ever met in my life. Unable to control the small classroom of 15, rude, opposing directions. It wasn't long before the entire class hated her. However, I noticed her favorite phrase was "If you don't like it, you can leave." I already knew I hated this school and the church. I was too mouthy and opinionated and was unliked by most of the admin. So, one day I made sure to annoy her. Sigh loudly when she's talking, maybe an eye roll or two. It wasn't long before she threw her go-to line at the class. "If you don't like it, you can leave," she eventually declared. I'm sure in her mind, dramatically. So I left. I walked out of the class and sat in the hallway. The principal, and I forgot this, but at this school your parents had to either allow the principal to paddle you, with a big plastic paddle, or they had to call your parents who would leave work right then and discipline you immediately. I know my mom signed the paper saying this guy could paddle me, but I hated this sub enough to risk it. Walked down the hallway and asked me why I was sitting outside. I simply told him the teacher said I could leave. The only fallout was my poor, pregnant teacher came back to finish out the year. I feel bad for that. But don't tell a bunch of 6th graders to leave if they don't like it. 'Cause bitch. Bye. Thank you. Next. A bit of a backstory. I have for some years now worked at some local farms as a farm assistant. Because employers gotta pay an employee fee to the state, I was hired by a medium-sized company that rents out assistants to farms so they can rent me without paying the employee fee, which is a quite large percent of what the employee earns. I later discovered that the company I technically worked for took about 25% of what the farm owners paid them in order to pay me, and the only work they're basically doing is doing the taxes for me. So I decided to quit and start my own private company where I rent myself out to them for the same price they paid that company and still do the same work with a substantially higher income, with the only extra work being that I have to do my own taxes from now on. So that was the idea. The farmers get a set amount of money from the state as aid to hire farm assistants, so they wouldn't be losing money by this. The amount they get in aid from the state is about 80k each a year. I only got 60k of that from the company I was hired under. This isn't money that can go to themselves since the aid is paid after they pay me. Edit. That is 80k aid for each farm, meaning 240k in total since I worked on 3 farms. Edit 2. It's not in USD. Divide with 9 I think to get my valuta. While I still was employed at that company, my employers, just for the sake of doing everything easy, just counted the days I worked at their farm with a fixed hour. Since it was about 2 hours work on each farm, they just wrote on the hour list that they sent to my company that I've worked 2 hours a day. So when I started up for myself, things took a turn for the worse because they tried to push me over a bit for their own convenience. I offered a deal to keep things similar and easy as before, where I set a price for a day's work, so even if I end up working longer a day I won't charge extra, and the yearly amount is the same they paid to the company I used to be hired under, and I still do just as much work. They however was not satisfied with that since they saw an opportunity to exploit this for their own benefit. They wanted me to get paid by the hour and work a day more a week. I reluctantly accepted because they wouldn't budge, and it's worse going without a job. I'd still get a decent higher hourly wage than before and still earn the amount a year I'd planned to earn by going independent, but instead of the extra work being just the taxes, I also now ended up working more days. In the new contract I wrote with them, it was stated I have to write up the hours by the minute and send them the time I used every day. The easiness from before has been completely tossed out the window. So their hope is obviously get more hours out of me on the money they're already paid by the state. Cue the malicious compliance. I started using a stopwatch and noted down the hours by the minute, which turned out to be some minutes more than 2 hours a day. On occasion the farm owners stopped by while I worked and we stood and talked for a bit. Could quickly be 15-30 minutes, which was mainly work related talks, what needed fixing or upgrading and stuff like that, so I'll let the clock continue ticking. Also on regular intervals I had to clear out the shit, which also took an additional 15-20 minutes. Toilet breaks was also added, the time it took to walk between farms was added, and other small stuff. Needless to say they needed to pay me more than the amount they got as aid, and farmers in this country don't really earn much because the expenses such as food for the animals takes away most of the income. So they were not happy about having to pay me close to 10k more a year each, something they would have avoided had they not been greedy and accepted my first deal. They then wanted me to work less days some weeks, which was fine because I started to feel a bit overworked, but they also wanted me to not add the chats in with the work time, which I refused. Apparently they wanted to take me to court over that, but as I've heard from one of their wives, someone I grew up with as a neighbor and also thinks this whole thing is silly, that the lawyer heavily recommended not to take it to civil court since I would most likely win, since work-related chats during work time would be counted as work. So I am almost no longer seeing them at all by the farm when I'm working. LOL. I have offered again the deal I proposed in the start, but for some reason they are against it. Would have made everyone's life a lot easier since they pay me the same for the same amount of work anyway. Thank you. Next. Wish I could post the photo but links are annoying. I am a graduate student, and as part of my duties in that role I am grading for a professor in my department. Last week I asked a student who never stapled his work to please do so next time. He turned in the same type of loose pages as last time, in a staples folder. Points to you, student. Points to you.